Okay, let's unpack this. Have you ever wondered how we can really, truly trust the results of a study? Whether it's about, say, a new health trend or consumer behavior, maybe even a new way of managing your team? Today, we're diving into what's essentially the accuracy check of all research, validity. It's really about making sure what we're measuring is actually what we think we're measuring, and crucially, how those findings apply out there in the real world.
Right. And what's fascinating here, I think, is that validity is truly the bedrock of scientific inquiry. It goes beyond just statistical
Which
significance.
just tells you it wasn't likely chance, right?
Exactly. Statistical significance says, okay, you found a pattern, it's probably real. But validity pushes towards substantive significance. And that means, does this pattern actually matter? Does it have real-world importance, practical implications? It's not just a tiny statistically real, but ultimately meaningless effect.
That distinction is so important. And our guide for this deep dive today is a really comprehensive review paper. It's titled A Typology of Validity by Weng, Marc, Lim.
Yeah.
Our mission really is to give you a clear, systematic way to understand validity. It's got lots of facets, from the core ideas to the different types. And crucially, how and when you establish each type during the research process itself. Think of it as your shortcut to figuring out if research findings are genuinely robust and, well, impactful. So let's start at the beginning. What exactly is validity? It sounds incredibly important, obviously, but I feel like it's often misunderstood, isn't it?
It absolutely is. At its core, validity gauges the degree to which your research adequately and appropriately represents what it's aiming to measure and test.
Okay.
It's all about the legitimacy, the meaningfulness of the conclusions you draw from the data, making sure those findings genuinely reflect the phenomenon you're studying. And this brings up a key question. How do we make sure our insights aren't just, mathematical artifacts, interesting numbers on a page?
Right, but grounded in reality.
Exactly. Grounded in theoretical and empirical reality. Validity is really the linchpin that connects those abstract theoretical ideas to what we actually observe and measure.
It sounds like this isn't a new idea, though. The paper mentions roots way back in early 20th century psychology and education, like with intelligence testing.
Oh, definitely. People
Wow.
like Terman, Thorndike,
Yeah.
they were grappling with this early on.
Mm-hmm.
How do you ensure a test for intelligence is actually measuring intelligence and not just, say, how well someone reads or their cultural background?
That makes sense.
And later, figures like Messick really help pull it all together, broadening the concept beyond just tests to how we make sense of any data, really.
Yeah.
But it's just as important to clarify what validity is not.
Oh, okay. Yeah. What are some common trip-ups?
Well, first off, it's not a single thing, not a one-and-done check. You can't assess it in isolation or with just one method. It's also different from reliability. Reliability is about consistency. Think of your bathroom scale. If it shows the same weight every time, it's reliable.
Got it. Repeatable.
Right. But validity asks, is that scale actually measuring your weight correctly? Or is it consistently off by 5 pounds? Or maybe it's measuring something else entirely. So validity isn't just consistency, and it's not just statistical correlation either. And here's the kicker. It's not an inherent property of the test or the survey itself. It's a feature of the inferences, the conclusions you draw from the data collected using that tool.
Ah, so it depends on the context.
Precisely. Which means validity can't just be assumed. It has to be rigorously established, argued for, in each specific research context. What's valid for one group or situation might not be for another.
That really highlights how fundamental it is, and the impact goes way beyond academic circles, right? It affects business strategy, government policy.
Absolutely. The paper points out that actually a fragmented understanding of validity is a real challenge for lots of organizations. This typology aims to provide a more cohesive framework, because these principles apply everywhere. Think about management if you develop a new leadership assessment.
You need to know it actually measures leadership.
Exactly. Does it cover all the important facets of leadership behavior? That's validity. Or in marketing, you design a customer satisfaction survey. Does it really capture the key aspects of their experience, not just how happy they were with one interaction?
So it's about ensuring insights are truly meaningful, whatever the field. Okay, so how do we actually do this? How do we build this validity? The paper talks about a staged approach.
Yes, think of it like building a house. It's a great analogy. You wouldn't put the roof on before you've laid a solid foundation and put up the walls, right?
Makes sense.
Each type of validity kind of builds on the last one. It ensures the whole research structure is sound. Following this progression means validity isn't an afterthought. It's built in from the very start.
Okay, I like the house analogy. Let's stick with that. So we're building our research house, maybe studying how leadership styles affect team innovation. We need a new tool to measure those styles. Where's the foundation? That's content validity, right? Stage one, pre-data collection.
That's exactly it. Content validity is the absolute bedrock. It's making sure your instrument, like the leadership questionnaire and all its items, adequately and appropriately represent the concepts, the constructs you want to measure.
Adequately and appropriately. What's the difference?
Adequately means comprehensive coverage. Are you asking about all the important facets of that leadership style? Or leaving big chunks out? Appropriately means it's conceptually sound. Do these questions actually belong to the concept of, say, transformational leadership? And it's fundamentally an expert judgment call. It's much deeper than just a quick look over.
Okay, so not just, yeah, it looks like leadership questions. How do you actually establish it then for our new assessment?
Typically, you run a pretest. You get
Yeah.
a panel of experts, academics, maybe industry folks who really know leadership, minimum of 2, usually, and you keep going until their feedback kind of levels off, what we call data saturation.
So until they stop pointing out new problems or gaps.
Exactly. They scrutinize every single item. Does it fit? Is it clear? Is anything missing? Is anything extra in there that doesn't belong? Another method is card sorting. You give the experts the questions on cards, maybe, and ask them to group them into the leadership styles without telling them the names first. You want to see if they naturally sort them the way you intended. High hit ratio is the goal there.
And this is all before collecting any real data.
Absolutely. The very first step.
Yeah.
Before participants see it. Because, the insight here is that researchers sometimes rush this. They assume, oh, it's obvious. But if you don't get this expert check right, your tool might be fundamentally flawed from the start, measuring the wrong thing or missing key parts. It directly feeds into the overall validity of your construct based on human judgment.
Okay, foundation laid by the experts. What's next? Still before we collect the main data, face validity. This sounds more like the common sense check.
That's a good way to put it. Face validity is about appearance. Does the instrument, does the questionnaire look clear, understandable, and relevant to the actual people who will be taking it? Your participants, who probably aren't leadership theory experts.
So it's about their perspective.
Exactly. It's about initial impressions, intuitive understanding. Not about whether it's theoretically perfect, but does it seem reasonable and clear to the user? Does it look like it's measuring leadership in a way they understand?
How do you check that for our leadership tool?
You do a small pilot study, get feedback from a few potential participants, again, maybe 2 as a minimum, up to the point you're not hearing new issues. And a really crucial check here is to ask them to explain some questions back to you in their own words, just to make absolutely sure they're not misinterpreting something.
To catch misunderstandings.
Precisely. This is the second step after content validity, but still before the main data collection. And it also contributes to construct validity and substantive significance, again, based on human judgment. And the nugget here is, you could have perfect, expert-approved content, but if your participants find the questions confusing or irrelevant or maybe just too academic,
They won't answer properly.
exactly, your data quality goes right out the window.
Yeah.
They might rush, guess, or just not take it seriously.
All right. Okay, so stage one is done. Experts say the content is right, content validity, and potential users say it looks clear and relevant, face validity. Now we collect the data from our actual study sample. The numbers start coming in. Stage two, evaluating the measurement model. Does the validation now shift from human judgment to, statistical proof?
It really does. Now we move into the quantitative checks. And the first one here is convergent validity.
Divergent, things coming together.
You got it. Convergent validity confirms that different indicators, different questions or items on your assessment that are supposed to measure the same underlying concept actually do converge or correlate highly with each other statistically. It ensures that these various ways you're trying to measure, say, transformational leadership, all point towards that same underlying idea. They hang together.
It's not just enough for them to be related, though.
Good point. It's not just any high association. It has to be theoretically justified. These items should be related based on the theory. And it's different from reliability, which just looks at consistency, not necessarily shared meaning.
So how do researchers test this convergence, especially for what the paper calls reflective indicators, where the questions are seen as reflecting some underlying thing, like different symptoms reflecting an underlying illness?
For reflective indicators, a key metric is factor loadings. Think of it as how strongly each question loads onto or represents the underlying concept. Ideally, these loadings should be high, often 0.7 or above is a common benchmark. Another really important one is average variance extracted, or AVE. This tells you, on average, how much of the variance in your questions is actually explained by the underlying concept itself. You want this to be zero point 0.5 or higher, meaning the concept accounts for at least half the variance in its indicators.
And if it's low, if the AVE is below zero point 0.5,
That's a red flag. It might mean you need to drop some weak questions or maybe even rethink if the concept is truly reflective. Perhaps it's formative instead.
okay. And what about those formative indicators, where the indicators actually form or cause the construct? Like ingredients making a cake, they don't just reflect cakeness, they create it.
Right. For formative indicators, it's a different process, often a two-step approach. First, you use something like regression to see if each indicator makes a unique, significant contribution to the overall construct score. Second, you might do a redundancy analysis. You check if your formative construct correlates strongly with another, similar measure that is reflective. This helps confirm you're measuring what you think you are. And this whole convergent validity check is the third step in our staged approach, right after you get the data. It contributes to construct validity and relies on statistical significance, the key insight. If your questions don't statistically clump together as expected, you might be measuring multiple different things unintentionally or maybe just noise. It undermines everything else.
Okay, so the questions for transformational leadership all hang together. Great. But what about making sure they aren't also hanging together too closely with the questions for, say, transactional leadership? We need them to be distinct concepts, right?
Exactly. That's discriminant validity. It's basically the flip side of convergent validity. It assesses whether measures of different constructs are, in fact, statistically distinct and not overly correlated.
So proving our apples measure is not accidentally measuring oranges, too.
Precisely. It ensures each construct in your study, each leadership style, in our example, is unique and captures something different from the others.
How do you establish that distinction statistically for those reflective constructs again?
A common way is to compare the square root of the AVE for each construct. Remember, AVE measures how much a construct explains its own items with its correlation with other constructs. The square root of AVE should be higher than any correlation it has with another different construct.
Meaning it relates more strongly to itself than to anything else.
That's the logic. For formative constructs, you often look at something called variance inflation factors, or VIFs. You want these to be low, indicating that the indicators forming one construct aren't too highly multicollinear. They aren't redundant.
Are there any tests that work for both reflective and formative?
Yes, there are newer methods. One popular one is the heterotrait-monotrait ratio of correlations, or HTMT. There are established cutoff values, generally below 0.85 or 0.90, suggest good discriminant validity. And honestly, just carefully inspecting the correlation matrix of the table showing all the correlations between all your constructs is always a good practice. You ideally want to see correlations between theoretically distinct constructs below, say 0.7 or zero point 0.8. This is the fourth step, following convergent validity. Together, they establish solid construct validity, meaning you're measuring the right things and measuring them distinctly. The nugget here, without discriminant validity, you might find relationships between constructs, but you wouldn't know if it's because they're truly related or just because your measures for them are muddled together. It clouds the interpretation.
All right, stage 2 complete. Our measurement model looks good. We know our individual building blocks, our different leadership style measures are internally consistent, convergent, and distinct from each other, discriminant. Now, stage 3, evaluating the structural model. Time to put the roof on the house, maybe, see how these blocks fit together in the bigger picture. How does transformational leadership actually relate to team innovation?
Exactly. Now we're looking at the relationships between the constructs. And the first type of validity here is nomological validity.
Nomological. Sounds a bit complex. What's the core idea?
Think of it as theoretical coherence. It's a form of criterion validity focused on relationships. Does the network of relationships you propose in your model make sense based on existing theory and prior research? So if theory suggests transformational leadership should positively relate to team innovation, does your data actually support that? It's about ensuring your model fits within the established nomological network of how these concepts are understood to relate in the broader field.
So it's not just finding any relationship, but finding relationships that align with theory.
Precisely. It demands that the connections you find conform to a theoretically grounded map. It focuses on the coherence of the entire system of relationships, not just isolated pairs. Though, the paper notes even one solid, theoretically expected relationship can start building that nomological network.
How do researchers test this? For our leadership and innovation study.
You'd start by building your conceptual model based on the literature drawing arrows showing expected relationships. Then you test that model empirically using techniques like structural equation modeling, SEM.
Right, I've heard of that. What does
Yep.
it tell you?
SEM gives you various goodness of fit indices. These basically tell you how well the relationships predicted by your theory match the relationships actually found in your data. You want high values for indices like GFI, CFI, TLI, and low values for error metrics like RMSEA. You also look at the R-squared values for your outcome variables like team innovation. How much of the variation in innovation is explained by the leadership styles in your model. And another metric, Q-squared or predictive relevance, should be above 0, suggesting the model has some power to predict outcomes. This is the fifth step, done after construct validity is established. It contributes to criterion validity and statistical significance, and potentially substantive significance too, if the theoretical story is strong. The key insight. Nomological validity ensures your study isn't just a random collection of findings, but actually connects to and builds upon the existing body of knowledge. It makes your research part of the ongoing scientific conversation.
Okay, that makes sense. Building on theory. Now, the final piece, the sixth step. Predictive validity. This sounds like the ultimate practical test. Does our model, our leadership measures, actually predict something useful, like future team performance or innovation?
It absolutely is. Predictive validity is also a form of criterion validity, and it's sharply focused on forecasting. Can your predictor variables, the leadership styles, actually predict future outcomes? It's all about the functional relationship, the practical utility in real-world scenarios.
How is that different from nomological validity? They both sound like they involve relationships and theory.
It's a subtle but important distinction. Nomological validity is more about the overall theoretical coherence of the entire model. Do all the pieces fit together logically based on past research? It operates at the model level. Predictive validity is more specific. It operates at the relationship level. It asks, can this specific predictor, like transformational leadership score, forecast this specific future outcome, like next quarter's innovation output? It's about the forecasting power of individual relationships.
Got it. Nomological is about the map making sense. Predictive is about whether the map can actually guide you to a future destination. How do we establish that predictive power?
Typically using regression modeling or similar statistical techniques. You look at several things. First, the coefficient. Is the relationship positive or negative, and how strong is it? Second, statistical significance. Is the relationship likely real or just chance? Assess via p-values, usually less than 0.05. T-values typically need to be above 1.96 or 2.58, and confidence intervals, which must not include 0.
So making sure the prediction isn't just a fluke.
Exactly. But significance alone isn't enough. You also need to look at the effect size. This quantifies the magnitude of the impact. How much does a change in leadership style actually predict a change in innovation? Is it a tiny effect or a substantial one? Cohen's F-squared or Pearson's R are common effect size measures here. This is the final validity check, the sixth step. It establishes criterion validity, relies on statistical significance, but crucially highlights substantive significance, the real-world relevance. The big takeaway. Predictive validity is the ultimate litmus test. Does your research actually help us anticipate or influence the future? If it can't predict, its practical value is limited, regardless of how theoretically neat it looks.
Okay, those 6 stages, content, face, convergent, discriminant, nomological, predictive, give us a really solid framework. But even if you follow all those steps, research isn't foolproof, right? What are some common landmines, threats that can undermine validity?
That's a really important question. You can do all that work, but things can still go wrong. We need to protect the study's overall integrity and how far we can generalize the findings. A major internal threat is something called common method bias, or CMB.
Common method bias.
Yeah.
Sounds common. What is it?
It can be quite common, especially in survey research. Imagine you ask someone questions about their job satisfaction and their intention to quit, all in the same survey at the same time.
Okay.
Their mood at that moment, or just the way the questions are phrased similarly, might artificially inflate the relationship between satisfaction and quitting intentions. The common method, the single survey, is creating bias, rather than you measuring two truly distinct things and their real relationship.
Ah, so the way you measure is interfering with what you measure. How do researchers fight that?
There are ways. Procedurally, you can guarantee anonymity, reassure people there are no right answers, just honest ones. You can also separate the measurements, maybe measure leadership styles now, and team innovation 3 months later. Or use different methods, perhaps surveys for leadership and objective performance data for innovation.
So changing up the method.
Exactly. And statistically, there are checks too. Harmon's single factor test is a basic one. Does one general factor explain way too much of the variance in your data? That's a warning sign. Checking VIF values, like we discussed for discriminant validity, can also signal CMB if they're too high across the board. A more advanced technique involves using a marker variable, something totally unrelated theoretically, and seeing if it correlates with your main variables.
Mhm.
If it does, that suggests method bias is present.
So vigilance in design and statistics.
Definitely. Proactive design and post hoc checks are crucial.
Okay, that's an internal threat. What about external threats? You mentioned generalizability, making sure the findings apply beyond just the people in this specific study.
Precisely. This is a huge issue. Your study might be perfectly valid internally for the sample you studied, say, software engineers in Silicon Valley, but can you generalize those findings to nurses in Chicago or retail workers in London? That's the question of generalizability or external validity.
How do you address that? You can't study everyone.
No, you can't, but you can strengthen generalizability methodologically. Use better sampling techniques like stratified sampling to ensure different subgroups are represented. Crucially, conduct replication studies. Does the finding hold up in different industries, different cultures, different time periods? Triangulation also helps using multiple data sources, multiple methods, getting different perspectives on the same phenomenon.
So it's about building confidence over multiple studies and contexts.
Absolutely. The paper talks about the pursuit of multiple evidences, aggregating findings through things like systematic reviews or meta-analyses, where you statistically combine results from many studies. This helps you see the overall pattern, understand the variations, and provides a much more grounded basis for saying, yes, this finding seems to hold true more broadly. The nugget here is, a single study, no matter how well conducted internally, rarely provides definitive, universally applicable answers. Generalizability is built over time through accumulated evidence.
This has been incredibly insightful. We've gone from the foundational checks before data collection through the statistical validation of measures and models, and now looking at threats like bias and generalizability.
And if we connect this all back to the bigger picture, understanding this typology, these stages, it really isn't just for academics writing papers. It's like having a compass when you're navigating the flood of information out there. It helps you, the listener, assess the rigor behind a claim, the potential real-world impact. It helps separate the solid insights from the hype or the studies built on shaky foundations.
Absolutely. So what does this all mean for you listening? Next time you come across a striking research finding, maybe in the news, in a blog post, a business report, remember this deep dive. Don't just ask, okay, what did they find? Ask the tougher questions. How did they make sure their findings were actually valid? Try to think. Which of these 6 types of validity content, face, convergent, discriminant, nomological, predictive, did they seem to address? Did they mention expert reviews, pilot testing, statistical checks like AVE or HTMT? Did they test theoretical relationships? Did they show predictive power? And maybe even more importantly, consider what that implies for whether you can trust the conclusions and apply them to your own situation. It's really about becoming a more critical, more discerning consumer of information, always questioning the underlying integrity of the knowledge we encounter.